Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Contributing Today meetup of this week. My name is Floor, and I'm one of the organizers of the Contributing Today meetups, this one as well, of course. I've worked in tech for about 12 years with an emphasis on open source software. Contributing Today is a mostly weekly meetup. We've switched we skipped a couple of weeks, but now we seem to be back on a very regular cadence again, so that's good. We're covering a different open source technology topic every week. And whether you're a regular or you're just tuning in for this week's topics, which is metrics and telemetry, either way, let friends and strangers on the internet know that you're watching this meetup by using the Contributing Today hashtag on Twitter, or I don't know, on LinkedIn or whatever you're using for your social media fix. And also join us in the chat, either on the website to the right, I never know which way to point, or on Discord, and you can find the link on our website, Contributing.Today. When you're participating in the chat or when you're tweeting about us or the show on Twitter, please be mindful of our code of conduct. You can find the code of conduct and sort of our terms and conditions through contributing.today/code-of-conduct. You can find recordings of past meetups like on Python or gaming or writing docs or funding or licensing via contributing.today/past-sessions as well. All right, let's get started, yeah? We're doing a bit of a panel, free flow conversation with folks from the FOSS metrics scene. And again, we hope that you join us in the chat and join the conversation. So I'm joined by two guests today. First guest that I want to introduce and call to the virtual stage is Riley Yang. Riley has been actively representing Microsoft to drive the CNCF Open Telemetry project, with his latest focus on metrics, API, SDK design, and several language SDKs. Before working on telemetry solutions, Riley has years of experience working on many projects, including, but not limited to, compilers, debuggers, profilers, language runtimes, and high availability, large-scale distributed services. Whew, that was a mouthful. Do we have Riley on our virtual stage?
Hi, yes. Hi everyone. So, so thanks, Floor, for the introduction. As you can probably tell, like I've spent more than 10 years working on the developer tools, and recently, as we start to have more and more developers using microservices, so we start to realize from Microsoft that the traditional, like the tool that you install on the single box, is not going to be very helpful if you have large-scale applications. So we start to put more focus on how do you become a more efficient developer in large-scale, like cloud environment. And telemetry is one of the definite answer we have. So I started to focus on the telemetry system 5 years ago. And the more we work on that, we start to realize people don't want to use any vendor-specific way to instrument their application. What they want is an industry standard and a very vendor-agnostic way of doing things. And telemetry is just a perfect scenario for open source project. So I've been working on the open census and open telemetry since the past 3 years, and I love it. And currently, my main focus is on the metrics part.
Awesome. And what was first? Were you at Microsoft and looking for a telemetry solution to fit sort of the bar, or did you come across open telemetry first and was like, oh, I need to introduce this at Microsoft as something that we can work on and collaborate with?
So there's a strong business need. Like in Microsoft, especially for the Azure cloud, we try to help customers using many programming languages. And it's just something that we cannot scale. For example, every day we heard there are new customers asking for Rust, they ask for Golang, Ruby, and even there's some languages that I've never heard before, although I spend a lot of time working on the language runtime, like the Julia language, some quantum computing. So we face the same problem with other companies, and we have forum that developers just share their idea. So a couple of years back, we started to talk with Google guys and AWS guys, and we're facing exactly the same problem. Like developers, they want to have multiple languages. They want to be able to integrate with different systems. And realize this is not something we want to compete, because this will create a miserable situation for our customers. And the goal, like we can compete on things that can create more value for the customer, but really want to combine the effort and bring a better experience for people who do development across like hybrid cloud or like across multiple cloud providers.
I love that. Let's pull our second guest in to join us on the virtual stage. That's Daniel Cortazar. Hi, you're a open source as well as inner source advocate, a Python developer, and a self-proclaimed data nerd. Daniel, you're also the co-founder at Bitergia, which software, and I quote, helps you understand the software development projects that matter to you. So can you speak a little bit to just what Bitergia does and who your typical customers are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Today we're broadcasting from Spain, so hello to everyone out there. So yeah, Bitergia is a startup. So we're a startup, and we started in 2012. Our initial goal was, most of us came from the university doing research on free software engineering and understanding how communities work, how developers work with each other, and other topics, but mainly free software engineering. And the point was, it seems that there is certain interest or certain industrial interest in the kind of things we were doing at the university. So we said, let's try to have a company. And nowadays we are 15 people. We are growing organically. We are small, but we are in a really interesting niche market, I would say. The very first customers we had were mostly open source foundations. And why open source foundations? Well, it happens that open source foundations and open source projects, they are very, very interested around one topic, or one of the most important topics are being neutral, right? So they would like to others to adopt the technology and to have developers to contribute to the projects, organizations, companies, non-profit, etc. So they are very interested in learning about who is joining the community, if understanding things as, is the code review fair across the several organizations? Is this a fair play? Because this is what we all want to have, right? And if we think about open source projects, there are certain, let's say, transparency layers. So we are talking about the source code, which is open to everyone, and there are certain freedoms, right, that you can use in open source. But then having the data is like another level of transparency. This seems to be, this is important for open source communities and open source projects. And data is definitely an asset nowadays. So why not to have this part of the open source foundations? So here we are.
Awesome. And during our briefing, for everyone watching, we do a briefing call 1 or 2 days before the actual meetup, and we actually already had a sort of a mini meetup in our briefing call. But you mentioned the Chaos. The Chaos project, which is a Linux Foundation project focused on creating analytics and metrics to help define community health. Can you talk a little bit to that thing as well?
Yeah, so the Chaos community was founded by the Linux Foundation in 2017 during the Open Source Summit in LA. And there were like a bunch of companies and foundations that were part of this initiative. So we can talk of Red Hat, Bitergia was another one of the founders. There were some universities that are still part of this, and some foundations, as Mozilla Foundation is involved, OpenStack Foundation, now Open Infra, and some others. So this was announced during the keynotes, and that was a point in time where the Linux Foundation created, let's say, the community, the working group, and somehow. Then the goal of Chaos at that point in time and nowadays is to have a place where everyone interested in open source metrics, specifically in the activity, community, performance, risk, the value of open source, all of these aspects, let's say, can go and discuss together. Now we have indeed to work to two main lines. The first one is the metrics discussions that are where basically we discuss from a high level perspective, from a conceptual perspective, let's say, the metrics. we can't forget about how we are going to implement them. But maybe some cases we cannot even implement them, right? But there are metrics that are certainly important. For this, there are different working groups. So there is a risk working group, there is a value working group, there is a diversity and inclusion working group, there is evolution working group. So there are several of them with different groups and people joining. Then there is a second big pillar of all of this, that is the software. So within Chaos, there are several pieces of software that you can use, of course, open source. And the goal there is to implement the Chaos discussions, let's say, when this is possible. And there are other metrics running and going on. There are a couple of perhaps interesting projects that I can mention that are overlaps by the I don't remember the Sean, probably if you are watching this, sorry about that, but some university in the middle of the US. I don't remember the name. Come on. Anyway, and then Grimoire Lab, which is the project in this case, Vitergia, is mainly leading and developing. So we are the main developer there, let's say. So there, in with any of both projects, you can check and start understanding the, let's say, the status of the community from different perspectives. And the idea is, let's say, to create awareness about what's going on. So some of the dashboards that we are using, in this case in Vitergia, providing to customers and so on, some of them are for these community managers and open source communities. Then there are others that are using, in this case, Grimoire Lab technology for their OSPO initiative, so the open source program offices. And then the last, let's say, bunch of customers or so that are using the software are inner source. That inner source is about bringing good open source practices within the walls of the large corporations.
Yeah.
So Chaos is about all of this.
Hence the name, maybe. Awesome. Now that we have a little bit more background for both of you, let's get started with some of the questions that are for both of you and we've collected beforehand. So one of them is, how do you know that you're collecting the right data? Is that just what brings you joy and the rest you Marie Kondo away?
Oh, really?
I don't make this up.
Yeah, so I would say normally people start by thinking about what's the business goal. And when you collect data, it could be for business analytics, it could be for monitoring, or it could be for troubleshooting. And for diagnostic, like troubleshooting, normally people would want very verbose data. And you can imagine like the amount of data would be enormous if you just collect all of them. So what typically you want is you have some filtering rule and the like level of the logs, and you only collect the thing when you have some trouble, like some issue or bugs. And for like understanding the system status, like the usage for monitoring purpose, I think normally the best practice is, instead of collecting all the data and waste the energy to transmit and store them, and most of the data just got deleted after a couple of months, what typically people would do is they try to abstract the data from the source. For example, if you could summarize the data saying, hey, I got 1 million requests, and these are the requests that are taking much longer time, and these are the things that are running very fast. And you only send that summary with few examples to the backend, then you have the best balance. And for business analytics, I think it's really depending on what's the goal. Like if the goal is to drill into the particular customer activity, there are a lot of issues related to privacy, security, and like the data ownership. But I've seen like some systems, they spend a lot of money just to collect and store the data because it's critical. Well, for some systems, it's less important for them. So my answer will be it depends, and it really coming from what's your business goal. But ultimately, I want to use a like very simple analogy. If every day you wake up and have every single cell in your body reporting the status, like the temperature, to your brain and telling you whether it's okay or not. You won't be able to be here and join the meeting because your brain is going to waste so much energy, and you're going to sit there and eat food every day just because of the energy consumption. So our body is kind of
I love this analogy. That's good.
We always think about how our body are working, and you try to find the sweet spot. And of course, the sweet spot will change as your system evolve or your business need will change. And you have always come and look at your data and understand what's the consumption. And for example, in Microsoft, we look at the consumption of the data, and periodically we discover a set of data that was very useful before, but no longer useful. And we change our ingestion and data collection.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, really. Indeed, when we start a project with a customer and in the community, in the Chaos community as well, and in some other communities, the general recommendation that we follow is exactly that. So first, start with your business goals. In some cases, instead of business goals, maybe it's worth using the notion of cultural goals. If we talk about inner source, because inner source is mainly about cultural change and moving people to behave in a different way. But in general, the business goals are the very first step. And for this, what we follow is the goal question metric approach that we, let's say, we sit down with maybe chief level or middle managers that they have specific goals or objectives to achieve during certain quarter or certain year. So we help them translate those goals into questions that can be later and easier translated into metrics. I would say that in our case, we are talking about different orders of magnitude in terms of data. So our recommendation in this case for software development data, which is the field I feel more comfortable, not telemetry coming from tools or programming languages, is have a centralized place where you have all the data. So then that's a bit different, the discourse here, that the one you're following. But the reason for this is that in this case, this is cheap. So we are talking about certain hundreds of gigabytes of information, even for big communities, CNCF. So I'm only focusing on software development analytics. So we are talking about activity, the events that we may have in GitHub or in GitLab. If you think indeed about the usual data sources of open source projects, maybe we have at most 10 of them. So we have the Git activity, we have the issues, tracking system, pull requests. Maybe we have Twitter accounts, communication channels as Mattermost, Slack, or some others. And then you may have CI/CD in some cases, continuous integration with Jenkins or Travis. So all of this information aggregated, certain hundreds of gigabytes, not that much. So then it's cheap in this case. And why do we want to, or why do I say that this is a better approach? Because once you have all of the data in one place, then you need to start having certain policies to store the data, curate the data, and maintain the data, because there is certain data decay. And then when we have the data in one place, and then we have the strategy in other place, right? So now there is a matter of, now we can match both worlds, right? So in the case of the Chaos community, perhaps, of software development analytics, the order of magnitudes are much smaller in this case. So it's much easier to have everything in one place. And then you know that everything is there. So then let's see how we can start querying that data lake.
You mentioned maintaining the data and data decay. Is there a best before date for data as well?
It's not like a yogurt, but definitely there is data decay. So if we think about, for instance, CNCF. So CNCF, they have graduated projects and they have incubated projects.
Yeah.
So there is a time where an incubated project moves into a graduated one. So if you have certain metadata saying this project is still incubated, you need to update this in somehow. And this is certain qualitative data that you need to improve the automated ones that you've been retrieving. So any new commit provided to the project X is now a graduated commit, let's say, not an incubated one. So
Right.
this is the kind of things that if you keep leaving the data just there in the database, you may have a decay, definitely.
Right. Okay, and we talked a little bit about GitHub data, and so I want to sort of like shift gears a little bit. So last Hacktoberfest is when we sort of restarted this meetup again under the Contributing Today banner, and there was a lot of attention last year and in the years before. But and I'm sure you remember, for the organizers, incentivizing unwanted behavior. Because it was only counting PRs. If you did 4 PRs, then you would get the T-shirt and the eternal fame and all those beautiful things. And so PRs were counted regardless of their quality or if maintainers were actually looking for PRs. So if it's not GitHub stars or number of PRs or I don't know, lines of codes, what are useful data points to measure the success and the health of a project, of an open source project by?
Shall I go again?
Go ahead.
Daniel first, Riley.
Okay. Again, I think this is a good question, and this is then probably I'm asking you back. So we are 3 people here, and then I ask you what is the most important metric for you, if you have to pick one. Probably we have 3 different metrics. So that's why I think a strategy is quite important with the goal question metric approach, or having certain business goals in terms of what we are trying to achieve in somehow, right? In terms of health, in any case, if I have to go for something, probably sustainability is one of them. Some specific topics as and this is kind of a big use case or a big container, something like developer demographics might be something to have in mind. So in this box, we can talk about newcomers, we can talk about retention rate, so for how long the developers that are joining my community keep engaging with the community and somehow either producing code, producing non-code artifacts, anything, or even participating and helping others in Stack Overflow, for instance. So that retention rate is really important, let's say, but a good, let's say, KPI, key performance indicator, if we look for something. And then you have people leaving the community. So perhaps from a community manager perspective, if you are, or from a, let's say, technical point of view in terms of this technology is critical for me, so let's have a look at who's going, who's there, who's participating there. Then we are interested in understanding who are the leaders from a technical perspective, but who are the ones that are leaving the community at some point. And you know that, so it's a matter of defining, let's say, 3 months or 6 months, someone we can state that person left the community, so it's not active anymore. And then with that definition, then you can start looking for those that left the community at some point, and say, we sent an email or something and say, we really miss you. Your work has been great, right? So what can we do? So you are back in somehow where you can help, I don't know, mentoring others or so. So that demographics discussion, I think it's important.
Riley, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the number one rule is there's no single metric that can work forever. I think in the history, I've seen some bad practice where people start to measure the number of lines of code that certain people contributed. Yeah. Then you start to have some bad guys. They just send a lot of comments and a lot of junk. And instead of having one line of code, they would like put all the braces, like every single brace in a single line. And that defeated the entire purpose. And with that, no matter what rule you have, if you use that as a single metric to drive the goal, eventually there will be some smart or quote unquote or tricky people who will learn how to trick the system. And once it started to encourage the bad behavior across the community. The other folks would think it's unfair, they start to follow. So the key is you always try to balance out multiple rules and let them like figure out the right balance, and you revisit the rule. And in open telemetry community, I've seen one interesting thing exactly as you mentioned. So when we were telling people, hey, we're about to announce the first beta release. And for any people who contributed before the beta release, defined by as long as you send a PR and they got merged, we'll send you a t-shirt. And we start to have a lot of random folks come in and say, hey, I found a typo. I'll just send a PR and change one single character.
Or remove a white space or whatever,
Yeah. And there are also people who intentionally send some document, they made a typo there, and later they ask their friends to send a fix. And that has defeated the entire purpose. So we realize we've been leveraged. So my general thinking is every open source project, if it's becoming successful, there will be some organizations. For example, there will be some steering committee. There will be maintainers for each project. They might try to recruit approvers. So depending on the role, there are different level of expectations, such like Daniel mentioned. So based on those roles, we probably can have multiple metrics depending on how they contribute to the project and how they interact with the others. For contribution, I think today, if you look at GitHub, the typical things are the PRs that you have versus how many of them got merged and how significant they are. Like the PR, normally they will have some tagging, either say this is a minor fix, some documentation CI improvement, some deployment thing, or it is a critical feature. And depending on the tagging, you can tell how significant those PRs are. And depending on the interaction, you can see whether the person just sent several PRs, but normally got rejected due to the bad quality, or they start to get more trust. And you start to build the connection between different people, because you will have some superstars in that project. They're either the maintainers or the key stakeholders. And if they interact a lot with a particular guy who's not who's not been in the project for a long time, and they're just new, then you can see this guy probably have more potential. And also the other part are like the issues, discussions, and some of the discussion could happen outside the GitHub, like Slack or other channels. So once you have those information relationship, you can start to identify based on the pattern who are the superstars. And there's a great tool that I used to help me to learn when I joined an open source project, which is called Gorse. It is the tool that you give, the input is the GitHub repo. And if you give a Git repo to it, it will travel through the entire history and see how different people interact with each other. And it can even output a very short video. So you can see like people, they work on different branches and folders, and they move to a different place, and how the code evolved and how the folder structure got changed. And just by spending like a few minutes watching the video of the entire repo evolution, you can tell who's the key stakeholder here. You can see if someone is making dramatic changes, they change the entire structure of the project, there's a stakeholder.
Hey, that's interesting. Can you share the link to the tool also in the chat so that we can pull it up and share it with the viewers? And when we're talking about sort of the data that you can get out of GitHub, I think my pet peeve with GitHub has always been that the activity bar that we also feature in the background of like this screen represents only a fraction of the work that people can do on a project. It doesn't take into account that sort of human labor, right? When you mentioned like discussions may happen on Slack, or like people might be more of a community driver or contribute in different ways that is not very tangible, or you can't see from just mere code contributions. So how do you solve for that? Is that, and the tool that you mentioned, or Biteria's tools, right? Is that something that you can solve for?
Well, I'll go now. So there is this discussion that, so while you were talking about this, Riley, it came to my mind one of the use cases that we were doing together with Red Hat, with in this case Diane Mueller and me, and we've been running an analysis on on how the network of the CNCF looks like. Maybe I can share my screen indeed, so I can show this chart.
Demo.
It's not a demo, but it's close to a
demo.
So this is the CNCF community as a chart, let's say, and we call this the jellyfish analysis jellyfish, because we have this big jellyfish here and then some tentacles here and there. So each of the pink dots that we see here are developers, okay? And each of the small blue squares are the projects. So we have Kubernetes, like this big star here, right? And then we have Argo here, gRPC, Open Policy, some others, okay? Prometheus, for instance. And then there are developers that it happens that they are working in more than one project. So there is a relationship between a pink dot, as we can see here, and two projects. If this developer has contributed, in this case, we were measuring, gathering data from Git activity, so commits in this case. And there is an edge if this developer has participated in both projects at some time during the period of time that we were analyzing. And the interesting thing here is how to reach not the superstars, but the rest of the community that are very, very important. So this use case that we have here is going to the other extreme. So how to help in somehow newcomers. And then the discussion I had with Diane and so on was, okay, we've realized that there is, 30 new people joining the OpenShift ecosystem, because we were analyzing the OpenShift and the relation between OpenShift and CNCF, as OpenShift is a distribution of Kubernetes in this case, right? And we realized that people are connected, right? So people start working on certain areas of the code, and if you start working there, there are other people that have already participated there. So it happens that you needed to talk to someone that is already part of the community. So from the community management perspective and onboarding for OpenShift and the rest of the CNCF community, it was a really very useful tool for Diane in this case that was running this to discover first the newcomers, and then second who they were connected to, because then it's not like now I can approach that developer, which is perhaps a bit rude or direct, but you can approach that developer through other community members, because then you can see the relationships between the different people here and there. And from that perspective, I would say the network analysis. So this is done with Remote Lab, again from Chaos Technology, but this is a network analysis. So you have an edge if a developer has participated in that project. So you can build this with any other tool, and then you can see where developers have been participating. You can have this network analysis over time. And going to your question, I think this is a good way of discovering those other rock stars, but they are not part of the very top of the tables, let's say. So.
Interesting. And we have a follow-up question also. What is a superstar? The new person asking a beginner question, which results in a better getting started guide being created, can also be a superstar.
Yeah,
I like.
Yeah, it's very subjective, but my personal definition is someone in the community that has a lot of connections with the others. So that means if you work with them, you have more opportunity to get exposed to the other people.
Daniel, what is a superstar?
This reminds me. So again, in the case of OpenShift, one of the MVPs that they had years ago in the community was a person that was mainly working in the chat. He was like the glue for the community, helping each other, pointing to the right direction, and so on. But then if you check the activity of this developer in the community, it was let's say small contributions in the terms of code, but that person was very, very important in how he was kind of bridging the community between other people, companies, and projects.
Yeah, I agree. The word glue or the bridge capture that exactly.
Yeah. So there is this metric indeed, which is in-betweenness.
In-betweenness.
Person, yeah, in between. It's like centrality in somehow. So you are in between two main networks, let's say. So you are bridging both communities in somehow, whatever you are measuring this. So these kind of metrics might be worth having a look at as well.
That is super interesting. I want to continue a little bit more about like the things that machines maybe can't track. So can you can you supplement data manually, or is that not considered to be scientific? So to explain a little bit further, I'm thinking that a project health is also largely correlated with its diversity and with the inclusion of different voices. But that's something that you'd be very hard pressed to track from someone's GitHub profile, maybe. So how can we cover for that, and how can we track so that we can maybe track a project's progress in that area over time? Go first, Daniel.
I go again? Okay. Really, just say, no, I go first.
Next time we'll let him go first.
Okay, perfect. So, well, in Chaos, we have this specific working group focused on diversity and inclusion. And that was the very first working group that we had in the project. This is a very good question, because I would say we need to focus on the big data and how we can take advantage of all of the data that is out there. But in anthropology, there is this concept of big data. This is about going to the details, right? Getting more directly talking to people and so on. So this might be part of this qualitative approach that we may have to understand open source communities. From that perspective, in the working group, in the D&I working group, by the way, I can share the URL here. Well, indeed, let me share again my screen. I can do it again.
Daniel, take over again.
Yeah. So here in the chaos.community, you already shared this slide, but the point here is that you have several working groups, and specifically in the diversity and inclusion working group that you can see here. Let me have this bigger. It's gonna be better for you. Yeah. There are several focus areas. So we can talk about communication inclusivity, contributor community diversity, event diversity, governance, leadership, project and community, and recognition of the good work. And for each of these areas that are, let's say, these business goals that we were discussing before, right? Then you can go and check some of the metrics that we may have there. For instance, event diversity, we may have specific questions that are later translated into specific metrics. So we can go to speaker demographics, attendees demographics, diversity access tickets, code of conduct at event if there's any, and family friendliness. And then for each of them, so what you will see is like a final metric, a description, objectives, the goals here, the filters that you may apply, and some certain data collection strategies. And as you can see here, for instance, in the data collection strategies, not all of the strategies here are only automated tools that can run and gather data from places here and there. From the D&I perspective, in any case, it's true that there are certain ways to guess through APIs the gender, but this is a binary approach only, so that's definitely a limitation. And this is based on the first name, with all of the limitations it has. But I've tried the technology several times, and I have to say that at least it's good to start discussions with the community. Like, hey, this is the data. Even if we focus, I mean, if we don't have the really detail that we can go to drill down and so on, these are the really high level data sets, and in any case, the diversity of the community is really poor in general in open source projects. So that's something to start with, I have to say.
Great. Do you wanna add to that, Riley?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. I think the key is you start to observe the data that is available to you, and you see what's the learning from that. It doesn't have to be complete. As long as you have the data and you see some pattern, you will be able to learn something. And regarding collecting the personal data or privacy data, I would say it doesn't matter whether you're working on open source or you're working on some private company technology. I think the general key is you don't collect any personal data by default. It has to be always opt-in. So the customer has to be very explicit and understand what data you're trying to collect and what's the consequence and how are you going to make use of the data. Are you supposed to share the data with the others? And with that consensus, they can opt in to give you data, which means by definition, you won't be able to get all the data you want, and you won't be able to get all the data that is evenly distributed. Some people would choose not to share the data. So you always live with that fact that you won't be able to observe everything. And that's given. Everyone is the same. And what you try to do is, based on that data, you try to conclude what are the things you can take from it. For example, I think it's very easy for people to, based on the limited data, to see if a certain open source community is driven by a core set of members, and they build a very high wall for the newcomers to struggle to get into the community, or they're building a very welcoming environment that people can just join and start to contribute. And you don't have to collect all the data. Just based on few examples, you will be able to tell whether this is the case or not. And regarding some of the diversity information, I think sampling might be a case. For example, in Open Telemetry community, we do celebrate every year there's an International Women's Day, and we do celebrate that. And we have a way to list the female contributors. But we know that it's not a complete list because some people, they just decided not to share that information. But that's still fine. As long as we can see the list keeps growing every year, and we look at the ratio, like for people who are willing to share their gender information with us, we look at the number of female developers, we see there's a trend. And I think that trend is the most important part instead of the absolute value.
All right. There's a follow-up question. Are there any guidelines on how to communicate about your metric definition? Should it be made explicit, for instance, that certain diversity attributes are being considered or not being considered?
I can go if then you're okay. Yeah. I think in general, yes. But there are some hard messages where you want to find the right balance. For example, like some of the metric that I've seen most of the communities keep internally. For example, they look at the comments. There are comments violating the rule, like the code of conduct or anything, and they do have measurement on that. But it probably doesn't make sense for them to communicate that broadly, because this is something they want to stop from the source. But in general, I think my answer will be yes. You want to communicate that ahead of time, and I've seen there's a common practice. I believe like CNCF already have some very standard boards where you can see the contributions like from different companies, from different regions, and those things. So my suggestion is that you start from a core set of the common metrics, and then you probably figure out some of the specific metrics that are more important to your product. And there might be some very sensitive metric that you got to think twice before you can share that with the others.
Yeah, in my experience, what I've seen is, first, if metrics are sometimes like colors. So if you say, oh, this metric is important for this and that reason, then people in front of you will say, well, maybe not. I have another opinion, right? Unless you have a really good use case, on the table, that you can start discussions and so on. That's a a really interesting discussion to have. Indeed, what we were discussing before about cheating on metrics and so on. I would like to bring this
vanity metrics.
Yeah, and maybe even gamification, right? And I remember I gave a presentation at the OpenStack Summit years ago. I think it was in Hong Kong, so 2013 maybe. We were discussing about the importance of metrics and how to track community metrics and so on. And I remember having a discussion with two people in front of me, and the three of us, one of them was discussing about, well, gamification is really interesting and important for this, that, and that. And the other one was basically claiming the opposite. And again, this is kind of an opinion, right? Or maybe based on experience or bad experiences and so on. So the question perhaps I have for both of you is...
Wait, the tables are turned now. Okay, good.
Here, so.
That's okay.
So we are talking about open source projects. And we know that when we are working in a Git repository, for instance, we need to leave our name and surname and email address or so. And this is somehow, or can be used for a project for certain purposes. Maybe to say, hey, you can see how big we are now because we have all of these companies participating in the development of Kubernetes, for instance. Is this a fair use of the data that you are leaving? Because we all leave traces in the communities we participate at. So is this a fair use, the attribution? What do you think?
I can go first if Flora.
Sure. Please.
Yeah, I think when you put some profile, like make that public, there's no clear consequence. You're basically making your information available to the public domain. That means anyone can use that, and even some like job hunters or recruiters, they can reach out to you and say, hey, we're seeing your profile and we want to reach out to you. So it's more, my take is this is more like you put your phone number on a paper and just publish that on some newspaper, and you want people to know. And the community can use that for whatever purpose they can. So there's nothing you can stop that. And for people who use that information to connect people back to their company and see what's the level of the enterprise investment in certain projects, I've seen that in many projects, and I even think it's a very common practice in most of the projects I've been working on. For example, if you look at the C++ compiler, we're looking for, hey, if the clone and LLVM backend are the projects that many like CPU manufacturers they bet on. If the answer is no, then probably you should question yourself, are you going to bet on that system? Because if those hardware manufacturers are not betting on this, that means this is not going to be highly optimized, and they will always have new CPU and GPU model. And it is a very valuable thing. So my thinking is that information is helpful, and if people decided to publish that, and community use that to tell whether there is an enterprise investment or it's just by the amateur developers, it is actually going to benefit everyone in the industry. So it's a good thing to me.
Okay, I think I have a little bit of an opposing opinion. So I have a GitHub profile so that I can participate in open source, right? So that I can contribute to projects that are near and dear to my heart. I do not have a GitHub profile so that the project that I'm contributing to can use my profile and be like, hey, look, we have the women's also because look at this lady. And so I think, of course, there's nothing from stopping a project, a maintainer, a group of maintainers to publish that information. But I don't think that they should. I think first reaching out to the person might be just a better way to go about it. Maybe asking them if you can include them on your contributors page. I think that's just the better way to deal with members of your community, because otherwise I might think twice about contributing to your project again if you're just using my information for showing that you have the token woman in your project. So that's, I think, more my take on it.
Just a clarification here. When I mean attribution, in this case, I'm not trying to bring things as gender, but simply saying this developer has contributed this amount of whatever. So gender, it's that line between. So where is the question is, in reality, where do you see the line where privacy starts? Gender is definitely one of those. But for instance, email address, is it that line in or out? Because you need to leave your email address to start contributing, or your name or surname.
Yeah. I think it's just good practice to ask first. That's what I would say. And so also I work for Microsoft, so it says on my profile, and I've linked my GitHub profile to the whole open source OSPO system of Microsoft. So it lists on my profile that I work for Microsoft. But it'd be weird if someone would say, "Oh, we also have like 5 developers that also work at Microsoft that work on this project as well," because I think, like, what kind of value does that add? Does that give the project a seal of approval just because there's people that also happen to work at Microsoft that contribute to this project? So I don't know. I feel like.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's very interesting for me to see that you have different opinion, and I also have different opinion on what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
For example, in the Open Telemetry community, we have a rule that we want the project to be really vendor agnostic. So if a certain work stream is very deep, it has certain technical depth, we don't want only like 3 developers from Microsoft to take over the direction. We want people to come from different companies. So we even have a rule that if something is really important, like the specification, and you got some developer from Microsoft, and then you got 2 other approvals, and all of them are coming from Microsoft developers, it's not ready to be merged. We really want people from Amazon, from Dynatrace, Lightstep, Google, any other company to come and contribute. And in this way, we can keep the balance. And this is the key to keep the project running for longer time. Otherwise, it's becoming another companies like projects. Basically, it's a fake open source. It's basically like, here we develop some source code, and here you go and take it.
I love that, and I'm also taking back control from Daniel, so that's good. And taking the opportunity to talk a little bit more about OpenTelemetry also, Riley. So what can you tell us about the languages that OpenTelemetry currently supports, and what is a look into the future of OpenTelemetry? What does the roadmap look like tiny little bit?
Yeah, so we started with almost 10 languages. I would say the core languages that currently we have the best support. When I mean best support, that means we're pretty close to the latest version of the specification. And when we do the release, these are the languages that we release very quickly after we announce the spec is ready. I think they cover the major languages like Java and C# or any .NET languages, Python, Go, C++, and JavaScript. And the second tier language I can see are the languages that are widely used, but currently those community might struggle on the funding. So typical examples I can give, PHP. It's used by a lot of people doing the WordPress and the websites. And we know it's important, but we're actively looking for more developers to join and contribute. So PHP.
This is a shout out to PHP developers, right?
Yeah.
If there's any PHP developers watching this.
Yeah. So please.
What do they need to do? Do they need to send you an email? Do they need to just go to the project, open an issue? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so I can share a link that OpenTelemetry community page. It has the information how you can get started, and we definitely look for PHP, Ruby developers, I think. And also there are some languages that start to get more popular. So one example I've seen a lot is the Rust language. And Rust has been used by some embedded systems or even for services that require super high performance. And so those are the things I think if you ask me, like I probably can tell, like if you ask 100 developers, a lot of developers would know like Java, C++, or like C#, Python, something like that. But if you ask people, hey, do you know Rust? I think the population is much lower, although like I can see the trend. So anything like that, I think OpenTelemetry is making progress, but not as good as the quote unquote the major languages that we have. And then there are the third tier. So for example, like embedded scenario. So the domain is pretty narrow. And for example, examples like I have MicroPython. It's a subset of Python tailored for IoT devices. So those are the things I think we would love to see some contribution. But so far, like we haven't seen a lot of movement there. So my ask would be if people are interested in contributing to the major languages, it's already running well, any contribution is more than welcome. And for people who want to take leadership on things that might have huge impact but currently underfunded, like PHP, it's a great opportunity for you to get more influence.
That's super interesting. You're making that's a good pitch, I think, for finding new contributors. You said you wanted to share something or show something.
Yeah. I'll find the link while Daniel is speaking.
Oh,
yeah, you can talk about what's next for Biteria for sure.
Yeah. So what's
this is your moment.
That's a good question. Well, so far I have to say, so I'll start in the past. So at least we've been lucky enough that the pandemic has not been that strong here for us and so on. So as most of our customers are working in the open, either in open source or in other ways. And that's something I would like to remark here, because it's like the open source community with all of the limitations and problems that they may have, or so it's a very resilient way of working. And this has helped a lot Biteria, and in general, I would say the tech industry to be where we are nowadays after a year and a half of all of this that has happened. So from now in the future, yeah, that's a good question. So we've realized of the following, and this is that well, open source communities, it's a great place to learn and influence the product. Indeed, the concept of influencing by Riley, I think it's a really great concept that we can discuss about this later. How can a company influence in the roadmap of a project? But then at the same time, it's community. So it means they have they have a lot of time typically, but they don't have that much funding for doing things. And then if you go to the opposite, then you go to the companies where they have typically funds, but they don't have the time to do things. So the usual way of proceeding, probably for any corporation or any company, is to go to those companies, right, and look for that funding. Said this, I would say that if you have the opportunity to work with open source foundations, talk to the people and discuss about technology and things and different point of view, this is a great place to start with. And this is where Biteria, we would like to keep working in the communities we are so far, that are mainly Chaos community and the Inner Source Commons, with a lot of great people there, that if you have a chance to join any of both communities, that's something that I would recommend you. So we as a company, we are moving into being part of the community, providing value to the community in somehow, right? Not bringing the usual commercial speech that we can, but well, it happens sometimes, right? We've seen talks that are giving commercial speech, and if we've done in the past, sorry about that, I have to say, that's not the way of proceeding, right? But Bitergia in the future, definitely together with open source and in the business of metrics, that's our thing and our market. So yeah.
And for both of you, you describe yourself as a data nerd, so now I'm applying it to both of you. Sorry. For people that are interested in like telemetry and metrics, and where can they go? Do you have a newsletter in your community, or where can people go if they want to learn more about these topics and want to get into it, and maybe want to try and give a couple of tools a go?
Yeah, so the link that I shared, it has a lot of information on how people can get involved. And it covers if people want to come and contribute, or they just want to come and use some existing things. And there are tutorials for every single language, and it covers all the telemetry thing. Not just metrics, but like if you want to do some business analytics, or it's for monitoring, or it's for troubleshooting. I think you just find the right balance, but the technology is very similar, and OpenTelemetry is providing that infrastructure for you.
In the case of the chaos community, I'm sharing now a link here, so probably you can share this now. There is a specific button on the top that says participate. So reading from the website, you have the mailing list, you have the video calls that we use, Zoom in this case, you have all of the GitHub activity. We have a podcast that if you are interested in either listening to the podcast or participating, would be great to hear from you. And if you scroll down for a bit, you will see like a bunch of items in a calendar. So feel free to join any of the discussions. Perhaps the very first approach would be say hello in the mailing list, introduce yourself. We are here to drive you around the community, and if you have any interest, happy to share our time with you, basically, and understand what the chaos is about.
Yeah, I would say it's a general practice for any open source project that people use some like communication channel like Slack, or they will have online meetings. And so far I've seen like most of the projects like I've been part of, they're very welcoming environment. So like just join and say hello, and like you can join the meeting and observe what's happening and ask questions. I think in general people are willing to help.
Yeah.
That's very good. We're nearing a bit of the end, but I would love to, if we can talk a little bit about data policies and GDPR and how that affects telemetry and metrics.
Yeah, that's a
huge topic, and it's probably a topic on its own.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, so set this. How does Bitergia do business? So in GDPR, there is there is this really huge URL that I don't know if you can share, but I'm posting here. This is from the European Union, and basically look on the internet for data controller and the concept of data processor. The way we are working with open source communities is, well, people that are whose information is being gathered, they should be aware that this is happening. How does this happen then with customers that are running open source communities? Typically, there's the role of community manager. Let's say through these open source foundations or companies that are running open source projects or so, through the community manager, they are supposed to announce that this is happening, right? So then we have these two different roles. In the case of Bitergia, we are playing the role of data processor. So we are processing data on behalf of someone else, a third party. And in this case, the data that we are producing is our customers' data. So, I mean, we help our customers understand the data, play with the data, create, I don't know, Jupyter notebooks, anything, right? Create visualizations or so. But the thing is that the data it's community data, is the customer's data in this case. So we are talking about an open source foundation. It's an open source foundation data, right? So the open source foundation is in this case the data controller, and the role that Vittorio is playing in this case is the data processor. So that's the thing. That's all I know.
Right.
Okay, so open telemetry is more like the tooling.
Wait, Riley, you're also not a lawyer.
I'm not.
Good.
I'm not. So I'm going to describe this from the technical side,
Good.
and my recommendation is anything that related to the regulation, you should always work with some lawyer, and it's always depending on like which country or region you're working on, and don't trust the developer because they're not expert in this area. They can give you the technical solutions. So for open telemetry, like the focus is on the instrumentation, like SDKs, and the agent, where we also call it collector. And I think the common thing when you look at data processing is you want to know what's the type of the data. It could be the data that doesn't carry any sensitive information at all. For example, it's just some information saying, hey, like the CPU usage is high, something like that. Or it could be privacy data. That means it could be your data that you don't want the others to know, like business data, or the data from your customer, like their credit card information, their email address, their phone number. And there could be the data from your partners, like you work with another company and they have some information they share with you, and it is their data you don't want to leak. And these are privacy, and also they're security related. For example, if by accident, people might collect something from the environment variable, which could be a credential, like a password or a connection token or something. Mm-hmm. So in general, you want to have a way of being very precise which type of data you're trying to collect. Like in open telemetry, we have a generic concept called attributes. So all the telemetry we collect is just a bunch of key value pairs. And the key value pair, each key will have a very clear categorization, whether it's a privacy data or it might be related to security sensitive thing. And my suggestion is through your entire design, like the data collection and the data transformation, the pipeline, how you consume the data and how you store the data, and how you allow the data to be exported. If you support people to grab the data from your system and port that to a different system, the control and policy and the tagging has to apply through the entire pipeline.
And just a quick comment here, in addition to the GDPR discussion and so on, that this both concepts of data controller and data processor are part of this. We are proceeding in this way because we are based in Europe and we are collecting European information. But there is this thing that if you've used any of the Vittoria dashboards through one of the customers, you can opt out. So that means that you can say, hey, I don't want to be tracked, so please don't track me. And then there is a process to run this, and this is part of the law. So people can proceed in that way as well.
Yeah, and they need to be able to go back and clean up the existing data if they want to opt out. And also, as Daniel mentioned, so the data storage is a sensitive thing. For example, certain country would require you, like all the customers from that country, their activity, the data cannot be stored in another country's data center. So you have to deal with all this. And the key is you have the metadata, like which part of the data is sensitive, which part is privacy, which is security related, and you flow that across the entire system. And in the end, like, you always have to work with a lawyer, and don't just work with developers and use what they told you as the guidance.
Yeah, if you have the chance, the recommendation is ask your lawyer to talk to the other lawyer. They will understand each other, and then they will bring back your whatever you have to do, and you say, okay.
And pay them is what our producer mentions in the private chat. Yeah, I think that's a good idea too. Maybe put them on a retainer as well. Okay, so we're really nearing the end of today's meetup. I have one final question to answer all the questions. What what do you choose, the imperial system or the metric system? Okay, that was a really bad joke. This is really all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Riley and Daniel, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I loved chatting with you. And I hope you felt the same way, but we'll see. And next week, for the viewers, we'll talk about infrastructure as code. So join us next week, same time, same place, for Contributing Today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Flor. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.